Mia Thompson had always been careful. She walked with her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes scanning the streets of Charleston, a town that had known her family for generations. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the ocean from the nearby harbor. She wrapped her light jacket tighter around her body as she stepped onto the wooden porch of the small diner at the corner of Main Street. It was Saturday morning, and the town's usual quiet hum was alive with the chatter of locals meeting for coffee, breakfast, or simply a place to gather and talk about life. The diner itself was cozy, with checkered floors, small round tables, and a counter lined with stools. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of pancakes and sizzling bacon. Mia loved this place. It reminded her of simpler times, of mornings when she would come with her parents, laughing and carefree, without a worry in the world. But today, she felt anything but carefree. She had recently made a decision that both thrilled and terrified her. She had gotten her first tattoo, a small, intricate symbol on her forearm that represented courage and remembrance. To Mia, it was more than just ink on skin, it was a story, a memory, a promise she had made to herself. Yet she knew that not everyone would understand. Tattoos, in this town, were often frowned upon, especially when displayed openly. She stepped inside the diner and took a deep breath. The warmth of the room and the murmur of conversation were familiar comforts, but her eyes quickly noticed the group of locals gathered near the window, their faces bright with amusement as they whispered to one another. They were pointing, their voices carrying just enough for her to hear snippets of laughter and teasing. Mia felt a familiar heat rise to her cheeks. Her hand, resting on the edge of the table as she moved toward a booth in the corner, twitched slightly. She had expected judgment, she had known it would happen. But expecting it did not make the sting any less sharp. "Hey, look at that," one man said, a hint of mockery in his voice. "What's that supposed to be?" Mia tried to ignore them, sliding into the booth and placing her bag beside her. She kept her gaze focused on the menu, pretending not to hear. But their laughter followed her like a shadow, echoing in her mind. "It looks silly," another voice said, louder this time. A few more snickers erupted, and one of them even pointed directly at her forearm. Mia's stomach twisted, but she stayed seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. After all, this tattoo was not for them, it was for her. She remembered the day she had first thought about getting it. She had been walking along the harbor, the water sparkling under the morning sun, when she had noticed a small memorial for fallen soldiers. The names etched in stone, the flowers left by strangers, and the quiet respect of those who came to honor them had moved her deeply. She wanted to carry that sense of courage and remembrance with her, in a way that was personal and lasting. The tattoo had been simple, a delicate symbol that represented strength and protection. To the locals in the diner, it might have looked like just another trend, another way for a young person to stand out. But to Mia, it was a mark of something much deeper, a promise that she would face life with bravery, no matter how small or big the challenges were. As she sipped her coffee, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest, she noticed a little boy at a nearby table staring at her tattoo. His mother was busy chatting with a friend, unaware of her son's curiosity. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with genuine interest rather than judgment. He pointed at the tattoo and whispered, "Mom, look at her arm." Mia smiled softly at the child, feeling a warmth that contrasted sharply with the earlier mockery. Here was someone who saw without laughing, who noticed without ridicule. It reminded her that not everyone would judge her, even in a place where whispers of disapproval seemed loud. The diner's bell chimed as more customers came in, and Mia's attention shifted. The smell of pancakes cooking on the griddle made her stomach growl, and she ordered a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Linda, brought the food with a friendly smile. "Hey, Mia. Haven't seen you around in a while. How's everything?" Mia returned the smile, grateful for the kindness. "I'm doing well, thanks. Just enjoying a quiet Saturday morning." Linda nodded, glancing briefly at Mia's tattoo. "That's a nice design. Very personal, huh?" "Yes," Mia said softly, tracing the edge of the tattoo with her finger. "It means a lot to me." Linda didn't ask for details, and Mia appreciated that. Sometimes, the simplest acknowledgement of respect was enough. Across the room, the group of locals who had laughed earlier continued their chatter, though their voices had grown softer as the diner filled. Mia noticed one of them, a man named Tom, lean toward his friends and mutter something. She didn't care to know what it was. She had learned that people who laughed at others often did so to hide their own insecurities, to make themselves feel bigger by making someone else feel small. Mia focused on her food, savoring each bite, and reminded herself that this moment, this quiet Saturday morning, was hers to claim. She didn't need their approval. Her courage wasn't dependent on their laughter or their judgment. After breakfast, she lingered by the window, watching the sunlight dance across the wooden floors. She saw a group of teenagers outside, skateboards in hand, and smiled at their carefree energy. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a sense of peace, a rare gift in a town that often felt so full of scrutiny and expectation. As she prepared to leave, she caught sight of her reflection in the diner window. The tattoo glimmered slightly in the sunlight, a small but undeniable mark of her choice, her story, her courage. She straightened her back and lifted her chin, walking toward the door with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt before. Outside, the air was fresh and the streets were bustling with life. Mia walked slowly, taking in the sounds of Charleston, the distant call of seagulls, the soft chatter of people, the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on the wooden sidewalks. She felt a strange mix of vulnerability and strength. Yes, the laughter had stung. Yes, there would always be people who didn't understand. But she also felt a sense of pride, a small but powerful flame that no words of mockery could extinguish. She passed by a small park, where an elderly man sat feeding pigeons. He looked up and nodded at her, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, and Mia nodded back. It felt like an unspoken agreement between strangers. The world could be harsh, but there was also kindness and courage and respect in places you least expected. As she turned the corner toward her apartment, Mia allowed herself to think about the future. The tattoo was just the beginning. It was a reminder of the woman she was becoming, brave, resilient, and unafraid to honor what mattered most. She knew that one day, people might understand its meaning. And if they didn't, that was their choice, not hers. For now, Mia Thompson walked with her head held high, her forearm bare for anyone to see, carrying a quiet message. Courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about facing the fear and choosing to move forward anyway. And though some people might laugh, some people might whisper, she knew that her story, her strength was hers to hold, hers to live, and hers to share with the world in her own way. The laughter of the diner would fade in time, but the meaning of her tattoo, and the courage it represented, would remain. Mia Thompson returned to her apartment after the morning in the diner, her mind still buzzing with thoughts. She felt a mixture of relief and pride. The laughter of the locals had stung her at first, but now it seemed distant, like the echo of a storm that had passed. In the quiet of her small apartment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply and reflect on the decisions she had made recently. Her apartment was modest but comfortable. Sunlight poured through the windows, lighting up the cozy living room filled with shelves of books, framed photographs, and a small desk where she often wrote her thoughts. She sat down at the desk and placed her forearm carefully across the surface, staring at the tattoo that had caused so much attention earlier. It was a small design, intricate yet simple. To anyone who didn't know the story, it might have looked like just a pattern. But for Mia, it carried layers of meaning. It symbolized courage, resilience, and honor. It represented a promise she had made to herself, a promise to face fear, to respect those who had given their all, and to live her life with integrity. Mia thought back to the day she had first felt the urge to get the tattoo. She had been at a local charity event near the harbor when she had met Commander David Reynolds, a retired Navy SEAL who had come to speak about courage and sacrifice. His presence had been striking, tall, strong, yet calm, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of experiences most people could never imagine. He had shared stories of his time in service, not to boast, but to teach lessons about courage, resilience, and honor. Mia remembered how deeply she had been affected by his words. She had listened as he spoke of teamwork, trust, and the sacrifices soldiers made for their country. By the end of his talk, she had felt a spark inside her, a quiet determination that she wanted to carry forward in her own life. The tattoo had been her first step. She had chosen the design carefully, spending hours researching symbols that represented strength and protection. It was her personal tribute, not only to those who served but also to the inner strength she wanted to cultivate in herself. Now, as she sat in her apartment, Mia traced the lines of the tattoo with her finger. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was more than ink, it was a reminder of her promise, a shield she could carry with her wherever she went. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. It was a message from her best friend, Laura. "Hey. Lunch today? I want to hear all about your new tattoo." Mia smiled. Laura had always been supportive, even when others weren't. She replied quickly, "Sure. Meet me at Greenfield Cafe at noon." By the time Mia arrived at the cafe, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the streets. Laura was already seated at a corner table, waving energetically. "Mia," she called. "Your tattoo. I've been dying to see it. Come on, let me see." Mia rolled up her sleeve and showed her forearm. Laura's eyes widened with admiration. "Wow. It's beautiful. Really meaningful too. I love it." Mia felt a rush of warmth. "Thanks, Laura. It means a lot to me." They spent the next hour chatting about everything: their work, friends, and small-town news. But Mia found herself returning to the topic of her tattoo. She explained why she had chosen the design, the inspiration behind it, and how she wanted it to remind her to be courageous every day. Laura listened quietly, nodding. "Mia, that's amazing. I mean, most people would just get a tattoo for fun or style. You actually gave it meaning. That's really special." Mia smiled, feeling a sense of validation she hadn't realized she needed. It wasn't about approval from strangers in a diner or random people on the street. It was about acknowledgement from someone who understood, someone who cared enough to listen. After lunch, Mia walked back through the streets of Charleston. She noticed the small details she usually overlooked: the laughter of children playing near the fountain, the old bookstore that smelled of paper and memories, and the way the sunlight glimmered on the water at the harbor. It was during this walk that she saw a poster on the community board, Veterans Memorial Ceremony, honoring those who served. Mia paused. Her heart skipped a beat. She realized that this was the perfect opportunity to connect her tattoo to something larger than herself. Without hesitation, she decided to attend. She wanted to see the ceremony, to understand more about the people she had been honoring on her arm. It was more than curiosity, it was a commitment. She wanted to live her promise, not just wear it on her skin. The day of the ceremony arrived, and Mia stood quietly among a large crowd. Families, veterans, and community members filled the town square. Flags fluttered in the breeze, and a sense of solemn respect hung in the air. The sounds of a marching band began to play, followed by speeches honoring the service and sacrifice of those who had given their lives for their country. Mia felt a lump in her throat. As she watched, she realized that her tattoo was not just about personal courage, it was about recognizing the courage of others. She felt a deep connection to the stories being shared, and a sense of pride for having taken her small step to honor them. Then, she saw him. Commander David Reynolds. He had returned to Charleston for the ceremony, and the moment their eyes met, Mia felt a wave of calm wash over her. He approached with the same quiet confidence she remembered, his presence commanding attention without a word. He paused near the center of the ceremony, surveying the crowd with a respectful nod. Mia felt her heart race. She wanted to speak to him, to thank him for inspiring her, but she didn't want to seem overzealous. She simply observed, letting the moment sink in. When the ceremony concluded, and the crowd began to disperse, Mia felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, and there he was, Commander Reynolds, standing with a small, polite smile. "You honor more than just yourself," he said. His voice was calm, measured, but carried the weight of experience. "That mark you carry, it's not just ink. It's courage, remembrance, and respect. That's rare these days." Mia's eyes widened. She had expected a nod or a brief smile, but his words went deeper than she could have imagined. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "I wanted it to mean something, not just for me, but for those who sacrificed so much." He nodded, and for a moment, they simply stood there, two people connected by an unspoken understanding of courage and respect. Mia felt a profound sense of calm and confidence, stronger than anything she had felt before. As Commander Reynolds walked away, Mia felt a shift inside her. She realized that true courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about standing tall in the face of judgment, about honoring your values even when others laughed. Her tattoo was more than a symbol, it was a declaration of her strength, her empathy, and her respect for the sacrifices of others. Walking home that evening, Mia felt the streets of Charleston in a new light. She noticed the kindness of strangers, the resilience of those around her, and the quiet strength she carried herself. The laughter from the diner earlier that week seemed almost trivial now, like a distant memory. Mia knew that people would always judge, and that not everyone would understand her choices. But she also knew that her confidence, her courage, and her dedication to honoring what mattered most were far more powerful than any words of ridicule. She arrived at her apartment and looked at her reflection in the window. The tattoo on her forearm glimmered softly in the fading sunlight. She smiled. It was more than a design. It was a statement, a promise, a piece of her soul that would guide her in every decision she made. From that day forward, Mia Thompson carried herself with a quiet confidence. She walked taller, spoke with clarity, and faced each day with a sense of purpose that had been born from her own choice to honor courage and remembrance. She knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but she was ready. And deep down, she understood something essential: true respect wasn't given lightly, and true courage wasn't measured by the absence of fear, but by the decision to face it with strength. Mia Thompson had learned that, and nothing, not laughter nor judgment, could take it away. The morning air was cool, tinged with the scent of dew and earth. Margaret stepped out of her house, a light scarf around her neck, feeling the crisp breeze brush her cheeks. The sky was clear, the sun just beginning to climb, painting the horizon in soft shades of orange and gold. She had grown used to the routine of caution checking over her shoulder, locking doors twice, and keeping her eyes alert. But today felt different. Today, she felt more prepared, more determined. John and Rex stood a few feet away, waiting patiently. John's calm presence was a steadying force. He had prepared a plan the night before, reviewing every possible scenario. Rex, the loyal German shepherd, sat quietly beside him, ears pricked and eyes scanning the empty street, a perfect balance of strength and alertness. "Ready?" John asked gently, his voice low and steady. Margaret nodded, gripping her handbag tightly. "Yes. Let's do this." Their goal was simple but important. Margaret needed to leave her house for a short errand, but this time, John and Rex would ensure she remained safe, and they would confirm that whoever had been following her could not get close again. Margaret climbed into her car, and John and Rex followed behind in their own vehicle. The journey was quiet at first, each of them focused on their surroundings. Margaret drove slowly, keeping the roads clear and steady. The early morning was peaceful, with only the occasional car passing by. Yet, John's instincts remained alert. He noticed a dark sedan several blocks behind them. Its driver kept a consistent distance, appearing cautious yet deliberate. John's jaw tightened slightly. Whoever it was, they were persistent. Margaret noticed the car in her rearview mirror and felt her heart beat faster. "They're back," she whispered, her voice trembling. John nodded. "Stay calm. Keep driving. Don't make any sudden moves. Rex and I have this." Rex let out a soft growl, a warning that carried more weight than any human voice could. Margaret took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. She had learned to trust John's judgment, and more importantly, she had learned to trust herself. As they drove, John made a subtle signal to Margaret to take a less traveled road. She followed his instructions carefully, her tires crunching softly over gravel and leaves. The side road was narrow and winding, bordered by thick hedges and trees that cast long shadows on the ground. It was secluded, but John had calculated every step. The dark sedan followed, but John stayed calm, maintaining a careful distance to avoid alarming Margaret. He had seen this behavior before in other situations during his service, a follower who underestimated the preparation and vigilance of those they sought to intimidate. John's plan was to lead the car into an area where it could be observed safely and, if necessary, reported to the authorities. Margaret's hands were steady now, her confidence growing. She had faced fear before, but this time, she was not alone. John and Rex had made her feel protected, and that sense of safety strengthened her courage. She focused on the road ahead, taking in the beauty of the morning, the gentle sway of trees, and the sound of birds. For a brief moment, it felt almost normal, almost peaceful. But the dark sedan was persistent. It adjusted its speed to match hers, keeping just enough distance to remain unnoticed by casual observation. Margaret felt the tension return, but John remained composed. He adjusted his rearview mirror and noticed the driver, a man wearing sunglasses, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The way he followed Margaret suggested he was watching, waiting, calculating. John made a quick decision. He signaled to Margaret to take the next hidden turn, a narrow driveway leading to an abandoned barn several miles down the road. It was a safe place to pause, assess the situation, and plan their next move. Margaret followed the turn carefully, her tires crunching on gravel as she entered the secluded area. The sedan hesitated briefly before continuing down the main road, losing sight of them. Margaret exhaled, her body relaxing slightly. "We lost them," she said, relief evident in her voice. John shook his head gently. "Not yet. They may come back. We need to be cautious." He stepped out of the car, with Rex at his side, and began observing the surroundings. The barn was quiet, empty, and perfect for a temporary safe spot. Margaret stayed in her car, watching John and Rex move with a calm authority that reassured her. For the next hour, John and Margaret devised a plan. John explained ways to vary her daily routine, routes she could take, and safety measures for her home. Margaret listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She felt empowered in a way she hadn't in weeks. Fear had controlled her life recently, but now, preparation and vigilance had replaced it. Rex, always attentive, moved around the barn cautiously, sniffing the air, listening for sounds beyond human perception. Margaret watched the dog and felt a strange sense of comfort. His presence, combined with John's careful planning, reminded her that she was not alone. She wasn't powerless. Finally, John turned to Margaret with a reassuring smile. "We'll drive back slowly. I'll follow you home. Rex will stay alert. If anything seems off, we stop and reassess. Safety first." Margaret nodded, feeling a renewed sense of strength. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done without you." John shrugged slightly, his expression modest but serious. "That's what we're here for. You did the right thing by asking for help. That matters more than you realize." The drive back was tense but controlled. Margaret followed the planned route, keeping an eye on the road and mirrors. For the first few miles, there was no sign of the dark sedan. But then, John noticed movement in the distance, a familiar shadow on the horizon. "They're back," he said calmly, not wanting to alarm Margaret. He adjusted his rearview mirror and observed the car's behavior. It maintained the same cautious distance, trying to remain unnoticed. John's jaw tightened. This was no longer random, this was deliberate. Margaret's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to focus on the instructions John had given her. Every turn, every stop, every glance in the mirror was calculated. She felt a strange combination of fear and empowerment. She was scared, but she was also ready. John radioed quietly to the local sheriff's office, providing a description of the vehicle and its behavior. "We're keeping a safe distance," he said. "But this person is following my friend. Please be ready to assist if necessary." Rex let out a low, warning growl, sensing the persistence of the threat. Margaret glanced at the dog and felt a wave of reassurance. With him and John watching over her, she was stronger than she had been alone. The sedan continued to follow them for several miles, but John had prepared contingency routes. At a planned junction, he signaled Margaret to turn onto a narrow, wooded road. The dark sedan hesitated but eventually continued along the main road, unable to follow the diversion without drawing attention. Margaret exhaled, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. "We did it," she whispered, a small smile forming on her lips. John nodded. For now. But the important thing is that we made sure you were safe. That's the priority. By the time they returned to Margaret's home, the sun was higher in the sky, casting warm light over the neighborhood. Margaret parked the car and stepped out slowly. The familiar sights of her home, her garden, and the street she had walked for years felt comforting. She realized how much fear had clouded her perception of safety and how important it was to have allies she could trust. John and Rex followed her to the door, ensuring the area was clear. Margaret locked the door behind her, feeling a sense of security she hadn't experienced in weeks. She looked at John, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You've changed my life," she said quietly. "I feel safe. I feel like I can face the world again." John smiled. "You always had the strength, Margaret. Sometimes, it just takes the right people to help you see it." Rex wagged his tail, nudging Margaret's hand gently. She laughed softly, a sound full of relief and joy. The bond she felt with John and Rex was more than protection, it was friendship, trust, and hope. As the day ended, Margaret realized that the challenge she had faced was not just about someone following her. It was about fear, loneliness, and uncertainty. And she had learned that courage didn't mean facing everything alone, it meant accepting help, trusting others, and taking control of her own life. That night, as Margaret sat by the window with a cup of tea, she thought about the day. The fear she had felt earlier seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet confidence. John and Rex had reminded her that danger could be managed, that threats could be faced, and that hope could exist even in difficult times. She looked at the darkening sky, stars beginning to appear, and felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in weeks. Tomorrow, she thought, would be different. Tomorrow, she would move forward with courage, guided by the knowledge that she was not alone. For Margaret, the chase had begun, but with John and Rex by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, bathing Margaret's living room in warm light. Birds sang outside, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, creating soft shadows on the walls. Margaret sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of steaming tea in her hands. Her heart still carried a quiet tension from the previous day, but alongside it was a growing sense of relief. She had survived a frightening encounter and, more importantly, had allies who would stand by her side. John had promised to return in the morning to help her plan the rest of her week safely. When the doorbell rang, Margaret hurried to answer it. John stood outside, tall and calm, with Rex at his side. The German shepherd's tail wagged slightly, sensing Margaret's presence and her calm energy. "Good morning," John said with a warm smile. "Ready for today?" Margaret nodded, feeling more confidence than she had in weeks. "Yes, I think I am." They began with small routines, checking doors, windows, and the perimeter of the house. John explained ways Margaret could make her home feel safer without changing her lifestyle drastically. He suggested placing motion sensor lights near the entryways, keeping her phone on her person at all times, and identifying neighbors she could call if she ever felt uneasy. Margaret listened carefully, jotting down notes in a small notebook she had prepared. Rex followed her around the house, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose as if to remind her that she was safe. Margaret chuckled softly. "I think Rex likes me," she said, feeling warmth in her chest. The presence of both John and Rex had become a comfort she hadn't realized she needed so much. Once the house was secure, John suggested a short walk around the neighborhood to familiarize Margaret with ways to spot unusual behavior and to gain confidence in her surroundings. As they walked, Margaret shared stories about her life, her childhood, her teaching career, and her love for reading. John listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that encouraged her to share more. "You know," John said, "you've had quite an adventurous life. Traveling, teaching, helping people, it's impressive." Margaret smiled softly. "I've had my share of challenges, but I've always believed that helping others gives life meaning." John nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. "That's something I admire. Life in the Marines taught me a lot about discipline and courage, but I've learned from you today that courage can be quiet too. It doesn't always need to be loud or obvious." They continued walking, and Rex trotted beside them, ears alert and eyes scanning the street. Margaret began to notice small details she had overlooked before: the subtle movements of people across the street, the pattern of cars parked in driveways, the sounds of leaves rustling in the wind. John encouraged her to trust her instincts, reminding her that awareness could be a powerful tool for safety. Later, back at Margaret's house, they sat on the porch, sipping water and enjoying the sunlight. Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. Fear had been her constant companion, but now, with John and Rex by her side, it had begun to loosen its grip. "You've done really well today," John said. "It's important to see that you can handle these situations. The more confidence you have, the less power fear has over you." Margaret nodded. "I never realized how much fear had controlled me. But having someone to guide me, it makes a difference." As they talked, a gentle knock at the door startled Margaret. She opened it to find her neighbor, Mrs. Lewis, holding a small plate of freshly baked cookies. "Good morning, Margaret," she said warmly. "I thought you might like a little treat." Margaret smiled, inviting her in. John and Rex stayed back respectfully as Margaret and Mrs. Lewis chatted. The presence of friendly neighbors reminded Margaret that she was not alone in her community. Small acts of kindness, she realized, could have a profound impact on someone's sense of safety and belonging. After Mrs. Lewis left, John suggested they practice a few safety drills, simple steps that Margaret could take if she ever felt threatened again. They reviewed locking doors quickly, making a phone call discreetly, and signaling for help without drawing attention. Margaret felt empowered, realizing that preparation could reduce fear and give her control over her life. Rex, attentive as ever, seemed to understand the exercises, watching Margaret carefully and offering silent encouragement. She petted him gently, feeling comforted by his steady presence. "You're amazing, Rex," she said softly. As the afternoon progressed, Margaret shared more stories from her past. She spoke of her travels across the country, the friends she had made along the way, and the moments of joy and sorrow that had shaped her life. John listened intently, occasionally sharing lessons from his own experiences in the Marines. The conversation flowed naturally, building trust and friendship between them. "You know," Margaret said thoughtfully, "I never expected to find friendship like this at my age. Life has its surprises." John smiled. "Sometimes the people we meet when we least expect it can make the biggest difference. I think today we both learned that." The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues across Margaret's porch. She felt a deep sense of gratitude. Fear had ruled her life recently, but now she realized that courage, trust, and friendship could reclaim the space fear had taken. She was no longer alone, and that knowledge gave her strength. Later that evening, as they prepared for dinner, Margaret reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The presence of John and Rex had transformed her perspective. She felt safer, more confident, and more connected to the world around her. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. John noticed the change in her demeanor. "You're doing really well," he said. "It's clear that you're ready to face the challenges ahead, not just physically, but emotionally too." Margaret smiled, a soft light in her eyes. "I feel like I can breathe again. For the first time in weeks, I don't feel trapped by fear." As night fell, Margaret sat by her window, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing that she had allies who would protect her and friends who cared about her well-being. John and Rex had shown her that even in frightening situations, trust and friendship could provide strength and courage. Rex lay at her feet as she sipped her tea, and Margaret felt a warmth that had little to do with the beverage. She realized that her life, once shadowed by fear and uncertainty, was beginning to open up again. She could laugh, she could speak freely, and she could plan for the future without the constant weight of dread. Margaret knew that challenges might still come, but she also knew that she would face them with confidence and support. John had taught her that safety was not just about physical protection, it was about awareness, preparation, and trusting those who cared. Rex had shown her the quiet power of loyalty and intuition. And she had learned that even small gestures like the napkin she had folded into a triangle could speak louder than words. As she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Margaret felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected friendship she had found. She thought about the days ahead and realized that with John and Rex by her side, she could face anything. The fear that had once shadowed her life had been replaced by courage, trust, and hope. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the soft breathing of Rex at her side. Margaret allowed herself to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities for strength and connection. And for the first time in weeks, she felt truly ready to meet the world, no longer defined by fear, but empowered by trust, friendship, and courage. The next morning, Margaret awoke to the soft golden light of dawn streaming through her curtains. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers from her garden. She felt a calm she hadn't experienced in weeks. The fear that had shadowed her every step was still faintly there, but it no longer controlled her. Today, she felt prepared. Today, she would reclaim her sense of safety. After breakfast, she stepped outside and found John and Rex waiting on her porch. John greeted her with a reassuring smile, and Rex wagged his tail enthusiastically. "Morning, Margaret," John said. "Ready for the day?" Margaret nodded, a quiet determination in her eyes. "Yes. Let's do this." The plan for the day was simple but crucial. Margaret needed to leave her home for an errand, and John wanted to ensure she could do so safely while continuing to build her confidence. They would follow precautionary routes, and Rex would stay alert, watching for any potential threats. Margaret felt comforted knowing that she had a team by her side, ready to protect her if needed. As they drove toward the town center, Margaret felt the familiar tension in her chest. The roads she had traveled countless times now carried an undercurrent of unease. But with John guiding her and Rex vigilant, that unease began to fade. The quiet, steady presence of her companions reminded her that she was not alone and that she had the right to move freely without fear. Along the way, John remained attentive. His eyes scanned the streets, observing cars, pedestrians, and buildings for anything out of the ordinary. Rex sat beside him, alert and ready to respond to any sign of trouble. Margaret, meanwhile, focused on her driving, gradually allowing herself to feel the independence she had lost in recent weeks. For the first part of the journey, nothing unusual occurred. The town was peaceful, with morning shoppers and workers going about their routines. Margaret noticed details she had previously overlooked: the bakery with its fresh bread smell, the small bookstore she had loved in her youth, and the friendly faces of neighbors who greeted her along the street. Small moments of normalcy reminded her of life beyond fear, and she allowed herself to enjoy them. However, just as they approached a familiar intersection, John spotted a car in the distance, a dark sedan that seemed oddly familiar. His instincts immediately went on high alert. "Stay calm, Margaret," he said softly, leaning toward her. "Do not panic. We'll handle this." Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. The car mirrored the behavior she had noticed weeks before, always appearing in places she traveled. But this time, she did not feel powerless. She had allies, a plan, and the courage to face the situation. John guided Margaret to take a slight detour down a side street, narrow and lined with tall hedges. The sedan hesitated briefly, then followed. John radioed the sheriff's office discreetly, providing the description of the car and its movements. He remained calm, speaking in measured tones, knowing that any sign of panic could unsettle Margaret. Rex growled softly, a low, controlled sound that sent a warning to the vehicle behind them without alarming anyone else. Margaret noticed the dog's alertness and felt a surge of gratitude. Rex had been a silent guardian, his presence instilling courage she had not known she possessed. They continued cautiously, taking a few calculated turns and finally leading the sedan toward a wider road monitored by the sheriff's office. Within minutes, the vehicle was stopped by the local authorities. Margaret exhaled deeply, relief flooding through her body. The persistent follower had been intercepted, and she was finally safe. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of relief and gratitude. She looked at John, who offered a reassuring nod, and Rex, who wagged his tail as if celebrating their small victory. "We did it," Margaret whispered, her voice shaking. I can't believe it." John smiled gently. "You did it. You took action, trusted your instincts, and asked for help. That's why we succeeded. Courage isn't just about strength, it's about making the right choices even when fear is present." Margaret felt a deep sense of pride. For the first time in weeks, she realized she could face the world without being paralyzed by fear. The support of John and Rex had shown her the power of trust, preparation, and companionship. She had been vulnerable, yes, but she had also been brave. After the sheriff confirmed that everything was under control, Margaret and John returned home. The town seemed brighter now, more welcoming, and full of possibilities. Margaret's small garden glowed in the afternoon sun, and she felt a renewed appreciation for the simple joys of life: a safe home, warm tea, and the company of trustworthy friends. That evening, Margaret sat on her porch with John and Rex. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the quiet hum of the town settled around them like a gentle blanket. Margaret reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. Fear had once ruled her life, but now courage and trust had replaced it. She realized that life's challenges could be faced successfully when supported by others and guided by careful preparation. "You've changed my life," Margaret said softly, her eyes meeting John's. "I never imagined I could feel this safe again." John shook his head gently, smiling. "You've always had the strength. You just needed someone to help you see it. And remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward even when fear exists." Rex nudged Margaret's hand with his nose, and she laughed softly. "And Rex, of course, helped too," she said. The dog wagged his tail, as if acknowledging the compliment. Margaret realized that their bond had grown stronger than she could have imagined. Trust and friendship were no longer abstract concepts, they were real, embodied in John's steady presence and Rex's loyalty. Over the next few days, life began to settle into a new routine. Margaret felt more confident going out, walking to the nearby shops, and interacting with neighbors. She continued practicing safety measures, knowing that preparation was part of her strength. But she no longer felt trapped by fear. Instead, she embraced the small joys of life: a sunny morning, the scent of fresh flowers, and the sound of Rex's paws on the porch floor. One afternoon, John suggested they take a short drive to the countryside. Margaret hesitated at first, unsure if she could trust herself to leave home again so soon. But John encouraged her gently, and Rex's excited anticipation reminded her of the adventures that life still held. Together, they drove along quiet roads, past green fields and streams, the air filled with birdsong and the scent of wildflowers. Margaret felt a lightness she hadn't known in weeks, a freedom that came from reclaiming her life. As they returned home, Margaret realized that fear no longer dictated her choices. She had learned that being prepared, trusting others, and facing challenges with courage could restore her sense of control and peace. John and Rex had shown her that safety and friendship were not separate, they were intertwined, and together they created a foundation of trust and confidence. That night, Margaret sat by the window, looking out at the stars. The quiet of the evening brought reflection, and she thought about the journey she had been on. From fear and vulnerability to courage and trust, the path had not been easy. But she had grown stronger, not just physically but emotionally. She realized that asking for help was not a weakness, it was a sign of wisdom and bravery. Rex lay at her feet, a comforting presence as always, and Margaret reached down to pet him. She whispered softly, "Thank you, my friend. You've helped me find courage I didn't know I had." Rex nudged her hand gently, as if acknowledging her words, and Margaret smiled. John, standing quietly by the doorway, watched Margaret with pride. He had seen many faces of fear and courage in his life, but there was something remarkable about the strength she had discovered within herself. It was a quiet courage, born from vulnerability, trust, and determination. John knew that Margaret's life had changed forever, and he felt honored to have played a part in her journey. In the days that followed, Margaret continued to thrive. She ventured out more confidently, greeted neighbors warmly, and even began volunteering again at the local library. Each step was small, but each step built upon the last, reinforcing her courage and independence. She knew that challenges might still appear, but she now had the tools, allies, and inner strength to face them. And though the fear that had once shadowed her life would never fully disappear, it had lost its power over her. Margaret had reclaimed her life, guided by trust, friendship, and the courage to act. She had learned that safety was not merely the absence of danger, but the presence of support, awareness, and resilience. One evening, as she closed the door after a quiet walk in her garden, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had given her an unexpected gift, a reminder that even in difficult times, hope, courage, and friendship could prevail. She knew she would face future challenges with confidence, knowing that she was never truly alone. As she turned off the lights and settled into bed, Margaret looked at Rex, sleeping peacefully at her side. She whispered softly, "Thank you, for helping me find my strength." And for the first time in weeks, she closed her eyes without fear, ready to face tomorrow with courage, trust, and hope. Margaret had discovered that the quietest signals, like her folded napkin, could lead to the loudest impact. That small gesture had brought her help, protection, and friendship. It had reminded her that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, the world could respond with care and courage. And with John and Rex by her side, Margaret knew that she could face any challenge, embrace any joy, and live her life fully once again.